You will remember Catherine. A pleasant good morning, Trinidad and Tobago, as I take the opportunity once again on behalf of the Leader of the Opposition and Political Leader of the United National Congress, the Honorable Kamala Persad-Bissessar, to welcome you to our Sunday morning press briefing, which we have been doing consistently over the last couple of years as we seek to bring the issues to you which have been impacting upon the people of Trinidad and Tobago in terms of their well-being, standard of living, and quality of life. And this morning, we continue in that same trend, that same trajectory, as we seek to continue the opposition's analysis of this national tragedy, which occurred on the 25th of February, as it relates to the deaths of our four sons, our four citizens who perished in that tragic accident at Paria's Fuel Trading Company Limited compound. This morning, I am joined by my two colleagues on my left, the Honorable Rushdan Paria, the MP for Mayaro, who has the responsibility of shadowing the Ministry of Trade and Industry, and on my right, the Honorable Dinesh Rambali, the Member of Parliament for Chaguanas West, who has the responsibility of shadowing the Ministry of National Security. So this morning, the three of us will seek to continue our analysis from an opposition's point of view, as I said, of this horrific tragedy and how it has impacted upon the lives of the families and on Trinidad and Tobago, and where we are, and from the opposition's point of view, what needs to be done to ensure that there is proper accountability, transparency, and governance in not only this particular issue, but as it relates to the affairs of Trinidad and Tobago. So without further ado, I will now invite my colleague, the Member of Parliament for Mayaro, Rushdan Paria, who will seek to address this morning's press conference, following which the Member of Parliament for Chaguanas West, Dinesh Rambali, will address the press conference, and I will do so lastly, and following the conclusion of our respective presentations, we will field questions from the media. Thank you very much, and I now invite Member Rushdan Paria.
Thank you very much, MP Darcy. Colleagues, members of the media, wider Trinidad and Tobago, our international audience tuning in, a very good morning to each and every one. On behalf of the Leader of the Opposition, Honorable Kamala Persad-Bissessar, the parliamentary arm of the United National Congress, I offer deepest sympathies and condolences to the family and friends of Mr. Kazim Ali Jr., Mr. Faisal Kurban, Mr. Yusuf Henry, and Mr. Rishi Nagisa. I also want to wish the lone survivor, Mr. Christopher Budram, a speedy recovery. I know this was a traumatic event for him and his family. I also want to join the nation in saluting Mr. Ronald Ramuta, who risked his life to save Mr. Budram. Mr. Ramuta is a national hero indeed. As a contractor myself, who have served in the petrochemical industry for the past 25 years, being subjected to very stringent rules and regulations of the sector, permit me an opportunity to address the dreadful incident that has taken the lives of 4 of our brothers, men with young families, many loved ones, and much to live for. While this event is tragic, the mishandling and maladministration of the government and its state-owned operator, Paria Fuels, borders on scandalous, if not criminal. I ground my position from a background of having raised serious issues about Paria's health and safety spending in the Parliament as far back as 2018. A Freedom of Information request carried out by the Fishermen and Friends of the Seas revealed that there have been 498 reported oil spills on land and sea since the beginning of 2018. I pointed out then to major shortcomings, and I questioned whether Paria and its sister company were compromising health, safety, and maintenance so that they can boast of large after-tax profits. Today, I publicly repeat that important and timely question. Did Paria Fuel sacrifice human lives for profits? Did they put profits before people? The board of directors of Paria Trading must tell the nation how much have been spent on health and safety and whether that allocation meets international best practices. They must also inform us whether risks have been managed at an acceptable level and whether all the HSE standards of a modern, progressive company were adhered to. It is evident from all the information available to us and from my own experience in the industry that there is criminal negligence in the death of these 4 divers, as found and can be ascertained through the OSH Act. This incident, which occurred at Paria Fuel Trading Company, is the largest industrial accident to happen in the energy sector in almost 40 years. It is the worst in an entire generation. This major accident speaks to failures of procedures and best practices, which has a ramification for all of Trinidad and Tobago's energy sector. The failure of Paria Fuel to take ownership of the HSE procedures, rules, and regulations have tarnished our international reputation in the energy sector. We must remain cognizant of the fact that this accident did not happen in a vacuum. Decisions were made at every level which contributed to the events which caused this disaster. This cannot be brushed aside, as it has ramifications for the reputational confidence of the sector as well. It is clear that there was a catastrophic failure of all safety protocols at Paria Fuel. It was the duty of Paria to plan for and implement emergency response systems, none of which seemed to be available on the day of the incident. An L2 safety briefing, which is a standard deliverable for complex operations, would have listed all the potential safety hazards, the list of what-if scenarios, and the risk mitigation procedures and responses should any event occur. A simultaneous operations risk assessment would have identified all operations on that day and signaled if any operations would put the lives of the divers at risk. And the basic principles of lockout-tagout procedures, if adhered to, would have saved the lives of these 4 men. The terms of reference given to the committee is deeply flawed and heavily slanted to absolve the state-owned company from any responsibility and accountability for this incident. I submit that the investigation into this tragic incident at Paria would not reveal the truth about this horrific disaster. The terms of reference has been craftily designed to hold the contracting company and not Paria to account. This is another scandalous, premeditated decision by a reckless administration. The terms of the investigation means that Paria will not be scrutinized for negligence even though it is common practice that the client company is responsible for its asset. Under the OSH Act, the owner of the premises has final liability for any incident. My colleague MP Ramberley will speak to that and provide additional clarification. Instead, in my view, the contracting firm most likely will be solely accountable due to a highly skewed and foundationally flawed terms of reference. The terms of reference is designed to clear Paria of any liability and to throw all the blame squarely in the hands of the contractor. As you can see, Paria Fuel saw it fit to terminate the contractor but failed to put its own players on immediate suspension as to preserve the integrity of the process of witness statements and evidence gathering. What we are witnessing, ladies and gentlemen, from both Paria and the government is a rush to evade responsibility. When questioned by MP David Lee about what Paria is doing to prevent this from occurring again, Minister Stuart Young responded by saying Paria is terminating the contractor. This is a clear signal, ladies and gentlemen, that the government intends to blame the contractor for this disaster. This is perversity, gross misconduct, and a dereliction of duty. The span of the inquiry would amount to another failed investigation and criminal cover-up by this PNM government. Paria Fuel, we must not forget, Paria Fuel is entirely the creation of this government. One would ask if both Paria Fuel and its sister company Heritage Petroleum have been pressured by this administration to show clear profits by cutting spending on critical operational elements, including health and safety, simply to justify the mothballing of Petrotrin. Paria's board is entirely appointed by this government. The suggestion by the line minister that he has no knowledge of the workings of Paria is either an attempt to avoid responsibility or an admission that he has no control over this critical energy asset. Paria Fuel is solely responsible for importing the nation's fuel supply. That such an event can occur with not a single suspension, resignation, or termination at Paria suggests that there is no or very little accountability at this critical state company. Justice and fair play demand that the scope of the probe should be restructured to examine Paria's policies, procedures, its health and safety practices, and its compliance with international best industry practices. This must be clearly stated in the terms of reference and not enveloped in flowery semantics. Failure to do so would make the contractor a scapegoat for the deadly incident and would free Paria and its officials of any accountability. It would be an absence of due process, resulting in the country being denied the truth about a mishap that caused the lives of 4 honorable citizens. Justice demands that criminal charges be laid against any official that is found wanting in this sordid affair. Let them have their day in court. They should not be retained on the job to continue to compromise health and safety and to put workers' lives at risk. The longer they stay employed at Paria, the greater the risk of another deadly accident. They are negligent, tarnished, unreliable, and they must be removed and be made to face the appropriate legal charges. Nothing less will do. As a society, we must demand swift and effective justice. Members of the media, in closing, as dreadful as this incident is, it is not surprising because of the pathetic governance of a failed PNM administration. This is an administration that pays little attention to human lives, proper management, and effective and ethical practices. You would recall how the government was dismissive after 5 fishermen of Cali Bay were tortured and killed on the high seas in July 2019. Mothers and other family members cried their hearts out, but the Rowley government showed no compassion and offered very little assistance. The treatment melted out to the family of the divers came as no surprise, as it fell into the modus operandi of this government and their relevant state agencies. Members of the media, I stand ready to answer any questions that you may have at the end of this press briefing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Member of Parliament for Mayaro, Rushton, Paria. And I will now invite the Member of Parliament for Chaguanas West, Dinesh Rambali, to address this morning's press conference.
Good morning, members of the media. Good morning, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. My colleagues at the table here, Member for Couva South, MP Rudy Inder Singh, Member for Mayaro, MP Rushton Paria. Our Honorable Political Leader of the Opposition, Mrs. Kamala Prasad Bisesa. Our job, of course, as the loyal opposition is not limited to the confines of the parliamentary chamber. And our duty extends, and we intend to carry out our duties with much fervor. And we will vigorously defend the rights not only of these families who have tragically lost their loved ones in this Paria tragedy, but we will ensure that we continue to bring the information to you, the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, and defend your rights on all counts, whether it is in the courtroom or out of the courtroom. Before getting into the law, and I want to commend MP Rushton Paria for his contribution, and a lot of what I will say will complement what he has spoken to. I want to speak first of all, before getting into the legal issues, to talk about the issue of humanity. You see, common humanity dictates that when people are in grief or facing the possibility of the death of a loved one, you go to them, physically go and meet them, tell them what information you have so far, offer some solace and support. And this is critical because, you see, last week when we held a press conference and Member of Parliament for Point-a-Pierre, Dr. David Lee, had spoken, he basically called upon Paria to treat with the families of these deceased persons, the divers, and to treat with them in a manner which was humane, to keep them in the knowledge of what was taking place, and to have particular regard to the circumstances which they were faced with. Instead, Paria stayed locked up all cozy and dry inside their offices while the families were outside in the rain and sun in the car park. They called in the police to ask the family to distance or disperse. They left the families in the car park, no refreshments, no bathroom facilities. It was the work of Dr. Lee and also other social society groups that got involved and chipped in to help these families. These families waited for days for someone to address their questions. Paria refused to talk to the family or give any information to them. They presumed the men were dead, presumed, while the families were in deep anguish and prayer. Paria has yet to offer help to these grieving families, and this is something that I heard from one of the lawyers retained by the families, that they have not gotten assistance. So apart from humanitarian requirements, this stroke of genius company called Paria does not even know that there are best practices for delivering news of accidents, emergency, and potential workplace fatality. They don't know that ideally a small team consisting of a senior manager, staff person, or workplace friend that knows the family, or even with the company of a counselor, should deliver news in person to family members. Imagine in 2022, Paria's managers and executives do not know that they ought to have accommodated the families in an appropriate spacious room where interruptions will be kept to a minimum. And I say this again because Dr. Lee, even as early as last week, Sunday, following the press conference, when I spoke to him later that night around 10:30 p.m., none of these things were carded. You know, Paria was not showing signs of having done anything. And to date, they show that they have been ideally very aloof. Paria ought to but seems to have no response plan and policy on communication with a family in the event of an accident, in the event it is ever required. Ladies and gentlemen, in any democratic and developing country, in circumstances such as these being described by MP Paria and MP Indarsingh to come, that you will hear today, a corporate citizen would have a corporate conscience and offer the families of victims exactly what information it can about what happened, and acknowledging those areas in which it does not know all the details. Has Paria asked any of these families what it can do to help? Even if the assistance is not required, the offer of help may be a step towards building a relationship. I have to say, in my 20 years as an attorney at law, I have represented families whose loved ones succumbed to industrial accidents. And in all of those matters, there was never an issue when it came to trial that families had to seek to recover from the courts the costs of wake, the costs of funeral, and any after rights. Companies and employers had already paid those costs at the time it was needed most, that is at the time of the funerals. So that is what I would like to say in terms of, when we deal with the humanitarian aspect, and why is it Paria's behavior is one that is aloof of the plight of the families. I want to turn to the nature of the emergency. You see, the nature of this accident was horrific. 4 lives lost in a pipeline underwater. This is not like an emergency in land, where systems are usually in a state of readiness, like the fire services or the emergency room at the hospital. We must recall that this was an accident occurring in a more or less enclosed space, deep underwater. So the question was there sufficient safety mechanisms in place, and more importantly, were these readily available in the event of an emergency? If Paria had a plan, they did not put it into practice. Clearly not even a knee-jerk response. We would have been glad for a knee-jerk response. In fact, there was no timely response at all. Not even a yes to a good Samaritan, a desperate son begging for a chance to save his own father. A son who proved that he could do it. He saved one of the divers, and that diver told him, "Go back for your father." Now, isn't that a good assessment of the risk involved right there? The rescued diver knew that the son could have saved his father, or else he would not have encouraged it. So that's the real-time risk assessment being ignored, and people must account, Paria must account to the country for that. So why wasn't that father saved? Who exactly said no, and why? These are the troubling questions we have to answer. Any investigative team, whether it be the Shiv Sharma-led team or otherwise, must be seen to be fair and inspire confidence in the process. The public is already enraged and upset, so it is worthwhile that they believe in the integrity of the process. There must be assurances that the findings of the investigation must be made public. There must be assurance that whatever gaps are found in the system and place of work, these must be fixed to ensure that there's never a repeat of same ever again. I want to say that there was no rescue in this particular instance. There was just a recovery. You see, Paria was bound, and these are matters of law which will have to be applied to the issues of fact as it comes out. Paria was bound to reassess prospective rescuers' ability to respond by way of rescue in a timely manner, depending on the specific hazard and circumstances involved in each entry. Paria was bound to reassess the prospective rescuer's ability to function appropriately while rescuing. Some of these things had to be done even before those divers went in there. Paria was bound to proceed to select a rescue team that can reach the victim in an appropriate time frame and is equipped and proficient in performing the needed rescue services. Inform each rescue team of the hazards they may confront during the rescue. Provide the rescue team with access to all permit spaces necessary so that the rescue team may practice and develop rescue plans. Did Paria do any of these things even before this job was undertaken? So these are questions that we have not heard of in the public domain or otherwise. Did Paria do any of these things? The point of a rescue is timeliness. When response takes hours instead of minutes, then rescue will turn into a recovery. And that is why I'm saying that Paria did not seek to rescue. Paria's mission was one of recovery. When an accident happens and your breath is running out, you don't have the luxury of armchair speculating. No. Response has to be swift. Was it in this particular instance? Why the delay from early afternoon to nearly midnight on Friday 25th? It has been said that the Coast Guard prohibited the son from rescuing his father. We demand to know why. Why ignore the pounding on the pipes? The men were alive at that time. And so when we look at the timeline, what we have not seen to date is the adoption and or implementation as well of a crisis management and emergency operations plan, which ought to have already been in place. It ought to have been designed by Paria to maximize human survival and preservation of property. We should not be calling for those things now or since the accident. Minimize danger, restore normal operations of the company, and assure responsive communications. This plan ought to have been ready and set in operation whenever a natural or induced emergency affecting the company reaches proportions that cannot be handled by established measures. A crisis may be sudden and unforeseen, or there may be varying periods of warning. This plan is supposed to be sufficiently flexible to accommodate contingencies of all types, magnitudes, and durations. Nobody is saying anything, so we have to go with unconfirmed reports and witness accounts that are in the public domain. According to Paria in its media release of 27th of February, or 28th of February rather, they claim they were alerted to an issue with the divers at around 2:30 p.m. They say they immediately initiated its incident management team and contacted the Coast Guard. We would like to know what exactly is involved in initiating its team. Were they immediately deployed to conduct a rescue, or were they merely contacted to begin rescue efforts? Then in that public statement, they go on to say that having consulted the who's who of the marine rescue world, they were in the final stages of formulating the next attempt. Pray tell, formulating? When men can't breathe, you still formulating. Yet, through it all, they failed to consult with one person who begged for a chance to conduct a rescue. Paria, in this release of 28 February, said incident management protocols at Paria were immediately triggered in accordance with established standards. At the time of issuing this statement, one member of the team has been found and is currently in a stable condition at the San Fernando General Hospital. Further rescue efforts are underway with the support of the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard. Now, the way that statement was released, it was meant to give you the impression that the Coast Guard did the saving and they continue to rescue, further rescue efforts. Paria did not have the common courtesy or decency to call out the names of the rescuers in this entire tragedy. The heroes called Corey, Ronald Ramuta, and Michael Kurban. That attitude of Paria reeks of hypocrisy and deceit. You see, as a matter of law, Paria has a duty of care, regardless of what they may try to do, and my colleague MP Rushton Paria said this, regardless of what they may try to do with LMCS, the immediate employer of those divers. Paria continues to have that duty of care at all material times, the duty to provide a safe place of work, the duty to provide a competent staff, the duty to provide proper plant and equipment, the duty to provide a safe system of work. I want to make the point here, and this is in direct response to what we had heard from a press conference of Minister Stuart Young. I want to make the point that there is no automatic culpability attributed to the LMCS, the immediate employer of the divers, who was an independent contractor employed by Paria. The courts have determined time and again that although generally a person is not responsible for the negligence of an independent contractor employed by him, such is not the case where the work involved is an extra hazardous and inherently dangerous operation, creating special risks of harm. In such situations, the person who orders the work to be done cannot relieve himself from liability by employing someone else to do it, and he is just as responsible for the negligence of an independent contractor as if he had done the work himself. So here it is, we are talking about Paria. The work involved had an inherent risk, and it was, the hazard involved was pretty dangerous, and they themselves are in total control of the area where the works were undertaken. The USH Act, time will not permit me to get into that, but the USH Act also codifies some of these duties that are cast on Paria. When we get to the investigation has been promised by all quarters. At this stage, we are hopeful that the nation's hawk eyes will make it difficult for Paria to get away with any actual bias in its investigation. But we have to guard even against apparent bias, as this is the only way confidence in the process can be generated. And I know on that point of bias, my colleague MP Indar Singh will speak to that. I want to say that, in terms of this tragic Paria incident, the particulars as we see it of obvious shortcomings, it was the duty of Paria to provide the divers with reasonable care under the circumstances. This they did not do. On the 25th, 26th, 27th and 28th days of February, Paria breached their duty to provide the divers with reasonable care under the circumstances. From the information arising in the public domain, Paria failed to timely, properly and adequately rescue the divers, despite having notice of the sucking in of the divers, a situation which could only have been sparked by Paria itself. In particular, Paria failed to immediately pay heed to rescue efforts by Good Samaritans and to continuously reassess circumstances following the first rescue. In doing so, Paria abandoned the divers for an unreasonable period of time. They failed to timely implement actions to promptly, properly and adequately rescue the remaining divers. They failed to make every reasonable effort consistent with the safety of the divers by way of rescue as soon as their situation was discovered, or they failed to promulgate or enforce or comply with rules or policies to ensure that divers or persons that are sucked into the confined spaces are not left out in the deep water by themselves for unreasonable periods of time. They fail to promulgate or enforce or comply with rules or policies to ensure that you have persons do not become further in depth of we will say damage or hazard. They fail to comply with industry standards or international guidelines regarding the requisite safety requirements for these type of work environments. They failed in having in place policies and procedures which prevent personnel from promptly or adequately rescuing a diver. And I could go on and on. They failed to maintain and monitor security cameras to provide real-time information which could assist in recovery. They failed to provide the means to the divers to remain for a reasonable period of time whilst rescue efforts were deployed. The divers were effectively abandoned by Paria in that pipe. They failed to have an adequate number of personnel, and this is something that we see experts in the newspapers. Vishnu Ramjatan is a name that comes to mind off the cuff. They failed to have an adequate number of personnel drawn from appropriate expertise so as to be able to promptly, properly and adequately rescue the divers, or they failed to properly train personnel so as to be able to promptly, properly and adequately rescue divers, violating OSHA provisions or international management codes and failing to have a proper, adequate and safety management manual. Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, I want to say our nation is getting accustomed to grieving. We are always united in grief, and this is one such instance when we as a people, we are hurting. Killings and murders are rampant, but even so, we never quite expected this level of horrific recklessness that snuffed out 4 vibrant lives and destroyed 4 beautiful families. For this Paria must be held to account. If we didn't know better, we might speculate that the stony silence from Paria in the immediate aftermath of the event was a calculated response. It is too eerie the way they stayed disconnected from the families and people of this country who were demanding answers. It is mind-boggling how they presumed the men were dead and failed to act. They failed to offer a safe place of work and a safe system of work as a matter of law and or fact. Paria has failed to do what is right. It has failed this nation. It has failed to get our confidence, and justifiably so. Ladies and gentlemen, fellow citizens, what we have seen by Paria over the past week illustrates clear elements of wanton recklessness, negligence, corporate greed, and malfeasance, which should evoke in us a furious desire to see justice done in the name of human dignity. Our grief must be channeled to reawaken our sense of patriotism. The raw pain of these families is palpable for all to see. We have not begun to address the impact of their unnecessary deaths even on their dependents, young infants and children. So to the grieving families, we in the loyal opposition join with Trinidad and Tobago in wishing you God's grace to cope and accept what has befallen you, what has befallen all of us. To Trinidad and Tobago, I say, don't let people mess with you and make you think this is not a real place. Let's make it real by holding those accountable to account. Let this tragedy not fizzle out as a 7-day wonder. One critical way we can honor these divers, and this is what we are seeking to do as the loyal opposition, one critical way to honor these divers is by conducting a thorough investigation and implementing changes to ensure the hazards involved in the tragedy are eliminated or controlled. These bereaved families may be relieved or find some small measure of solace to know further tragedies will be prevented, even though it comes too late for their loved ones. Trinidad and Tobago mourns the loss of Kazim Ali Jr., Yusuf Henry Rishi Nagisa, and Faisal Kurban, and in their honor and for the integrity of their families, we must ensure that justice should not only be done, but should manifestly be seen to be done. I thank you.
Thank you very much, MP Rambali. And Trinidad and Tobago, this coming Tuesday, our country and the world will commemorate International Women's Day. Our hearts as a nation hang heavy with the women who have lost their husband, their father, their son, and their brother in this ghastly, harrowing national tragedy in which 4 divers subcontracted by Paria fuel trading have lost their lives. And I take the opportunity to join with my colleagues to offer our deepest condolences to the families, immediate and extended, and the relatives, the friends of the late Faisal Kurban, Yusuf Henry, Kazim Ali Jr., and Rishi Nagisa. Our deepest sense of condolences. Our thoughts and prayers are also at this time with the lone survivor Christopher Budram and his family also. And we take the opportunity here this morning to commend the persons who played their respective role in the rescue of Mr. Budram. Our lives are also with the women of this country as they continue to fight the scourge of crime and violence against women in a society where violence against women seem to thrive under this administration. Only last Thursday, a 35-year-old mother of 3 was brutally killed and her body burnt beyond recognition. And it is incumbent upon this party led by the Honorable Kamla Prasad Bisasa to remind this country of the cold-hearted, the callous, and the inhumane treatment meted out to the families of these divers by Paria Fuel Trading Company. My colleagues have focused on the humanitarian side. We as a party, we continue to stand on the side of the people. And those who know the foundations of this party will tell you that we have always stood on the side of the struggle for peace, bread, and justice. And this morning, it is unfathomable to think of what Paria has done in terms of its inaction and its delay. And we must never forget that after posting hundreds of millions of dollars, in fact, in 2019, I am told their profit margin was $109 million. In 2020, it was $231 million. And as a country, we must never forget that Paria had difficulty in finding 1 red cent to extend even the scantiest of courtesies to the families of these divers. They were forced to stay under a bus shed. The company, which itself boasts of access to a number of bungalows, could not even find the appropriate accommodation to house the families of these divers in this traumatic period and so on. Not even a tent was rented. Paria did not even send a bottle of water, a pack of biscuits for these families who stayed round the clock with their little children, devoted to being there for their loved ones. And we must also take into consideration when we saw reports of the media highlighting the families' visits to the forensic center in St. James to view and identify the bodies of their loved one, not even a courtesy vehicle to transport the families, knowing full well of the pain, the suffering, and the trauma that they would have faced at this juncture. And this morning, I want to ask the Prime Minister and the Minister of Energy, what are they waiting on? Paria is not a private company. This is a state company where 4 of our nation's sons died. The Minister of Energy, on a number of occasions, he himself has boasted about being a practitioner at the Industrial Court of Trinidad and Tobago. He has boasted about knowing the labor laws of this country. And I ask the question because, you see, this is a minister who has told Trinidad and Tobago that there is the need to let's wait and see. Wait and see what? When you have been communicated with the decision of Paria to sever ties with LMCS, and without compromising or abusing the due process and so on, we have to ask, what is the delay? Because as I said, the cabinet, the corporation soul, has the ultimate responsibility with the Paria board, the Prime Minister who is the head of this cabinet. And why has the government delayed in asking the members of the board of Paria, led by Newman George, to resign and or hand in their resignation? What is the wait and see about in asking the CEO of Paria, Mr. Mushtaq Mohammed, to step aside, to be sent on administrative leave? The Director of Terminal Operations, Mr. Colin Piper, and we have not been told who is in charge of health and safety at Paria. Is it that Paria, in their quest, as my colleague has said, MP Paria, to save monies, to cut costs and so on, to penny pinch, as we would use that phrase, is it that Paria has contracted out its health and safety to someone outside, someone externally? Or why are we not getting that particular answer in relation to who is in charge? And we are saying this morning that they should be sent on immediately from a management point of view and in keeping with due process, with the necessary good IR practices and so on. And if at the end of this investigation, wherever, if no one is culpable in terms of who was sent on leave and so on, then due process must kick in. But at the end of the day, we cannot, because we cannot as a responsible opposition allow this to remain, or the status quo to remain intact, because it is an investigation. The scene of the accident may be contaminated. At the end of the day, persons with influence within the management structure may in their own way, I cast no aspersion, but at the end of the day, we have to accept the reality that it could, or their mere presence could influence the outcome of an independent and objective investigation. And the Minister of Energy announced that the government has assembled a committee to investigate this matter. And this has brought very little comfort to the families of the victims and the people of Trinidad and Tobago, because the track record of this government as it relates to the appointment of committees under their watch has brought little confidence. It has instilled little or no trust within the taxpayers of this country based on the track record of this government in terms of how they have dealt with in relation to the appointment of so-called independent committees, and how they have dealt with reports when they have been finalized by these committees. Because I am forced to ask, and we must never forget as a country, that in 2017 an investigation was done by Christian Mute into the procurement of the Cabo Star and the Ocean Flower and the ferries and so on. The Mute report produced a series of questions requiring government answers, and up till today, the Prime Minister has failed and his government has failed to provide the population with the answers. We must never forget, in 2018, the public uproar over Trinidad and Tobago's vote against the hurricane-ravaged Dominica's request for a waiver of fees to the Organization of American States. The Prime Minister appointed retired diplomat Christopher Thomas to find out how Trinidad and Tobago had come to record a vote that was opposite of its position on Dominica's request. In pinning the blame on a breakdown of communication, the report merely reinforced the public's position about government's probe in terms of a lack of trust and a lack of confidence. We must never forget, in 2018, when faced with a sexual harassment scandal at the Ministry of Sport, the Prime Minister established a committee headed again by one retired permanent secretary, Jackie Wilson. It included attorney-at-law Elaine Green and a social activist, Fulade Matuta, to investigate the circumstances which led to the Ministry of Sport using taxpayers' money of $150,000 to facilitate a contract employee who was dismissed after filing a report of sexual harassment against a cabinet minister. The report was withheld by the Prime Minister on the grounds that the committee had not spoken to the then minister. Then we know of the COVID in July of 2020. During the COVID lockdown, the Prime Minister responded to fiery protests in Mova by establishing a community recovery report with a promise of actionable response. Where is that report? Why has not yet been made public. And only last month, the Prime Minister appointed, after 3,500 plus COVID-19 deaths in this country, appointed a team of 5 medical professionals to investigate the conditions and standard of care for COVID-19 patients. The report was released, and last Friday in the Parliament, the Prime Minister came to address the country and to really take the heat of Paria and take the heat of his government incompetence and inaction to lift public regulations and guidelines and so on as it relates to COVID-19. But the Prime Minister failed to tell the country what will his government do as it relates to addressing the 16 recommendations in the report of Professor Simangal. And then we have been told of this committee to investigate the island-wide blackout and so on, where the mandate and the terms of reference of the committee remains vague, and whether this report, when completed, will be laid in the Parliament of this country and be subject to what we would term a joint select committee investigation and scrutiny, ladies and gentlemen. And I am of the opinion, I have little, the opposition has little or no confidence in this investigative committee to investigate these deaths at Paria, because I believe and we believe that this investigation committee or investigative team is a defense team that will come out in defense of a government appointed board. We must never forget that this Paria board has been appointed by the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago. It has been appointed by the Corporation Seoul, and the chairman of Paria, we must never forget the chairman of Paria, Newman George, is a close confidant of the Prime Minister. He's part of the inner circle of the Prime Minister. He's the golfing buddy, he's the golfing friend. He's found on a number of golf courses with the Prime Minister. And we in the opposition, we are of the opinion that this will not be a truly independent investigation. It is really a cover-up committee. Whilst we cast no aspersions on the qualifications of those individuals who have opted to serve and their willingness in the context of national service, this accident, this fatal scenario occurred on the seabed. It entailed deep sea welding and commercial diving. Who in this team will be prepared based on their qualifications and experience to don commercial equipment and go to the depths where this pipeline is located and experience the confined space in terms of where those individuals were working when this accident occurred. And in that regard too, we have to ask, where is the Minister of Labour in terms of the OSH agency and the report or the investigation that has been commenced by the OSH agency? We do not know who are the members of this OSH investigative team. We do not know of their mandate. We do not know of their terms of reference. And we have no confidence in the Minister of Energy and the Minister of Labour, because we must never forget that there was an explosion on Naiquan's gas to liquid plants on the compound of the Paria refinery about 11 months ago. And we were told by the Minister of Energy and the Ministry of Energy that a report is being compiled. No report up till today in terms of its finality. And we have been told of preliminary reports. And where is the OSH agency's report, Minister of Labour, into this explosion at Naiquan after 11 months? And will this committee be charged with the responsibility of finding out breaches in occupational safety and health by Paria, and who will be responsible for the breaches and so on. And we, as I said, if this committee is not set up to identify which officers were responsible in their respective ways for the breaches that led to the death of these divers, then the committee is merely a smokescreen committee set up to appease public pressure against Paria and the government. The Prime Minister may have designed the terms of reference of this committee so that it will serve, as I said, as a public relations tool to protect Paria rather than a proper investigative tool to protect the interests of the now deceased divers and their families. We must never forget that the Paria board of Newman George, Dr. Fayed Ali, Eustace Narcis, Peter Clark, Riza Salim, and Avis Chedi, if they had any decency this morning, they would have handed in, or when this accident occurred, they would have handed in their resignation. And as it relates to the composition of this committee, because we are concerned about the terms of reference, the expertise in terms of experience in relation to the issues that I've pointed out in relation to deep sea welding, underwater work operations and so on, confined spaces, and the expertise in terms of the members of this investigative committee. And the opposition, through our leader, the Honorable Kamala Prasad Bisesa, we have already found that one of the members of this committee, in a person by the name of one Eugene Tia, we are of the opinion that it is a scandalous appointment, and it opens the door to accusations of the government tampering, manipulating, and covering up these investigations, because this person named, at no time did Minister Young indicate to disclose the fact that he was the lawyer in 2014 for Mr. Tia in a matter in the Court of Appeal against Evolving Technologies and Enterprises Development Company Limited. Also representing Mr. Tia alongside Minister Young in this matter was Michael Kwamena, who is currently the chairman of the board of Trinidad Petroleum Holding Company Limited, the parent company to Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited. And we must never forget as a country that Mr. Michael Kwamena is also the personal attorney to the Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Christopher Rowley. So in that regard, I have to ask the question here this morning: is Mr. Tia a closet PNM? Is Mr. Tia an independent PNM? Is Mr. Tia a card-bearing member of the People's National Movement? Because in this country, people will tell you that they are independent. They have no political affiliation and ties. And when you put them under the microscope, when you put them under the necessary interrogation and the investigations are done, their political independence or their so-called independence disappears. And this is why we are asking the question this morning about the true independence of Mr. Tia, and whether, I hope, with the passage of time, that we do not find that any members of this particular committee is conflicted in any way, that it will not bring about a true sense of independence in relation to accountability and governance. And we in the opposition will continue to call and insist for an impartial and unbiased investigation to take place. And at the end of the day, we have said, and my colleagues, we are calling upon for this report to be published in its entirety, to be laid in the parliament of this country, and to withstand the full parliamentary scrutiny. This report, if when completed, must go through the Standing Committee on Energy and Energy Matters, because at the end of the day, the energy sector is one which is governed by rigid health and safety protocols and rules. Therefore, the standards are global in nature. And to give more credibility to the independence of this investigation, one would have thought the minister said that there will be representatives from Shell and BP in terms of health and safety and so on. Did the government not give consideration probably to approaching the International Labour Organization to further give legitimacy, or to give the committee a thorough sense of, or a true sense of independence, by attempting to get someone to sit on this committee from the International Labour Organization and so on, members of the media, and Trinidad and Tobago. Whilst this accident may seem like an unfortunate accident, we did not reach this place by accident. There are many factors leading to this accident. In the midst of this tragedy, we have been hearing reports, as I said, of hundreds of millions of dollars in terms of profit margin. And as my colleague indicated, Paria must account for whether it compromised its expenditure on health and safety. Has Paria been doing the necessary when it comes to the provision of safety equipment through safety practices and evaluation and hiring of safety staff and so on? And what is important, as I said, we did not arrive here by accident, because this government, through Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley, has been on a mission to destroy and eliminate the voice of workers in the workplace. They have been on a course of eliminating recognized majority unions in the workplace. And we must never forget that trade unions act as a check and balance against companies and work in the interest of workers, ensuring that the companies do the needful and not compromise its function and jeopardize the interest and safety of workers. This government, as I said, has been on a mission to eliminate workers and their representatives. And if we want to be true to the memories of these fallen workers, Trinidad and Tobago, first and foremost, must, and this country must not allow health and safety of workers and all of our citizens to be compromised. And I am saying, first and foremost, we must be prepared to send a message, that is all the workers of Paria, to send a message to Newman George, Paria CEO Mushtaq Mohammed, and the Director of Terminal Operation, Colin Piper, that they will engage in a day of solidarity with all of these fallen workers and their families. They must down their tools and assemble en masse, because the opposition we are getting reports that health and safety protocols are being compromised in Paria, and workers need to speak out. Their voices need to be heard in terms of addressing this particular issue. And I want to tell the government of Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley, the Minister of Energy and Energy Affairs, that the United National Congress will not rest until justice is served in this matter, not only for the families of the deceased, but to ensure that there is a shift in the health and safety paradigm in this country. And also, we are calling upon the Minister of Labor to tell the country when the findings and the recommendations are made, if he is prepared to revisit the Occupational Safety and Health Act, and if he is also prepared to advocate for stiffer penalties where breaches and violation and infraction of the health and safety or the Occupational Safety and Health Act is found wanting because of the inaction of citizens of this country. And Newman George must tell this country whether he and the board members convened an emergency board meeting within 1 hour of being informed of this accident, and why did they fail to execute a recovery plan with his Minister Stuart Young and Chairman Newman George. If it was your brother, it was your nephew, or if it was your son, would you have facilitated Coast Guard to point their guns at persons who were willing to engage in a rescue mission? Would you have thwarted the zealousness and commitment of citizens who were willing to engage in a rescue mission? And at the end of the day, we demand to know who gave the instruction to point guns at committed citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. We demand to know who also ensured that who sealed this pipeline that led to this catastrophic and unforgettable situation in this country. This must never be allowed to take place in our country. I thank you.
We have some questions coming in.
Thank you very much. And we now will take questions from members of the media.
This goes out to the entire panel. What do you think of the reaction of the Prime Minister? Do you think it was satisfactory? Also, from the perspective of the PMC families, and do you think they would have been looking for the Prime Minister for some comfort and reassurance?
Well, in fact, the opposition has made its position very clear. The crocodile tears, we will not accept any further crocodile tears. The actions of the Prime Minister and his entire government and the government appointed board has found to be wanting, because at the end of the day, there has been little or no communication. There has been little or no empathy from this government. We must never forget that when 7 fishermen died on the high seas, who were also sons of Trinidad and Tobago, a minister of government in the person who was the acting minister of national security, Fitzgerald Hine, said that there was no need for any government minister to be present on the ground in Cali Bay and so on, because they did not have a government, a member of parliament in these constituencies. And at the end of the day, as I said, this government seems to have little or no empathy when it comes to families and so on in opposition-controlled constituencies. They seem to be heavy with finding the appropriate resources, and this is why we will continue to demand who instructed the Coast Guard to point guns at persons who are willing to be part of a rescue mission. Why up till today, Paria through Newman George and its CEO has not told the country whether a rescue mission could have gone into operation within an hour. Where was the leadership? Mr. Newman George and his entire board, did they come down to Paria compound and work in tandem with Paria management and all and sundry in terms of stakeholders who were willing to be part of a rescue mission? They were very concerned, I think, about pursuing a taste of carnival and in terms of what was happening, and not with the cries and the pains and the suffering of 4 ordinary families in this country.
Okay, question for MP Paria. MP Paria, is there a cost for the L2 safety briefing that you mentioned?
Any HSC requirement involves some cost, especially when you have to bring specialist unit, specialist teams, persons with the required skill to understand the risk assessment, to do the what-if scenario. They all carry costs. So definitely, in terms of a tendering for a project like this, one would have to factor in all the costs associated to ensure that the job, as complex as it is, can be delivered safely. So in my respectful view, based on how the events unfold, the information in the public domain, clearly a lot of these activities may not have happened, and I put it to you that there may have been some serious cost cutting that led to this sorry state of events that happened that took the lives of the 4 divers.
Based on your experience, are you concerned that a lawyer with little experience in the energy sector is chairing this investigative committee?
Well, at the end of the day, I mean, I may not want to speak specifically on the issue of who is chairing, but definitely a lack of technical expertise in undersea operations is clearly missing. I think there is one person who have some experience, but when you're looking at a forensic investigation that has to happen, where is a person with that forensic capability, that forensic IT capability to look at emails, deleted information on hard drives and so on? This has to be a full-blown investigation driven at a policing level. So clearly the skills that is required for an investigation of this matter is not there in the current lineup of members on that committee.
It's a question for MP Rambly. Do you agree with the timeline for the investigative report? Do you think 45 days is too long, or is it too short? Or what are your thoughts?
I think that 45 days taken on its own is too long a timeline. Already what should have happened is that the USH agency ought to have taken custody of, and this is, they are statutorily bound to do so, they should have taken custody of certain information within the bosom of Paria. And with that being taken into custody, I think we should look for a shorter time frame, because what is happening is that the longer you take to effect this investigation, you would have the person's memories, their recall could somehow easily be infiltrated with running commentary, as well as with the passage of time. People tend to become more unreliable in terms of what they remember having occurred. So I think 45 days taken on its own is a fairly lengthy period of time. We would have thought, as MP Paria has said, and also MP Indersing, once the committee is fully armed with the requisite expertise, there is no reason why it should take 45 days. And that is I can understand 45 days sounding on its own, well, that is reasonable. But if you have the requisite expertise that can inspire the confidence in the population, 45 days is clearly too long, and we should look for a shorter time frame.
Also, is there any legal requirement that would make the board have to step down or step aside while this investigation is taking place?
There isn't such a legal requirement, but what you are dealing with is that where it is you have been part and parcel of the management's decision in a tragic matter like this, you ought not to give the perception that you are involved and may somehow have influence in sanitizing what occurrences took place. And therefore, yes, they should step aside. So the short answer is there's no legal requirement, but there is a best practice that we should see being set as a standard by this same management of Paria, and they should step down.
Mr. Indarsing, what does the opposition intend to do with the Eugene TM matter in light that the Energy Chamber has come out and defended his appointment?
Well, I mean, the opposition will continue to call for Mr. Tia to step down. We will continue our public pressure at all levels within the parliamentary framework, outside of the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. And as I said, this is why we have posed these questions to Mr. Tia. As I said, the whole question of conflict of interest, the leader of the opposition has addressed this in a very adequate manner via her press release, and in relation, and this is why the opposition is concerned about the independence of this committee and committees which have been appointed under the government of Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley. And this is a national tragedy. This is not an administrative matter that occurred within Paria, and Mr. Eugene Tia, or if any members of the committee are indeed conflicted in any way, they should do the honorable thing and resign. Mr. Tia has a conscience, and from an opposition's point of view, we will continue to put this government under scrutiny, and all who are connected with this government in a direct or indirect manner. Well, we want to, if there are no further questions this morning, I want to thank my colleagues, MP Rambali and MP Rushton Paria, for the work that they have done in putting the issues to Trinidad and Tobago as it relates to this tragic accident which led to the deaths of 4 of our treasured sons of our country. We are deeply pained in the opposition. We share their grief, we share their pain, we share their tragedy. This must not be a one and done situation. If we want to continue to honor the memories and the legacy of these individuals, we must continue to demand as a country transparency, accountability, and good governance. And we must all play our respective roles in upholding a proper safety and health culture in our country as we seek to develop a better Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much.